A woman?
Yes. But it's not what you think.
Your mother?
She likes to think so.
After a super successful reboot with the 2006 film Casino Royale, James Bond would return to theatres 2 years later for a story that followed on directly. This 2008 release would be mocked for its title, a bit like this plumber that I know who trades under the professional name The Shit King.
You're just saying that to hurt me.
James Bond is back in Quantum of Solace.
Well, to be a pretty cold bastard who didn't want revenge for the death of someone he loved.
You don't have to worry about me.
Quantum of Solace was a James Bond film released in 2008, which, unusually for the Bond films up to that point, continued a story from the previous movie that looked to have been mostly wrapped up. Casino Royale had rebooted the film series with a look at Bond's first mission as a 00 agent, where he fell in love with Vesper Lynd, who as it turned out was forced to betray Bond in order to keep her boyfriend alive. She died, but it seemed to everybody but Bond that Vesper had loved Bond enough to try and save him. Normally a Bond film ends, and the next film would be an unrelated story, with at best a line somewhere that might reference events or characters from previous films, but that would usually be about it.
You really don't know anything about us.
Quantum of Solace is not quite a sequel, just a continuation of the same story, even though Casino Royale works so amazingly well as a one-off story. Imagine this, you have a self-contained story where somebody works their way up the ladder and becomes East Anglia's largest suppliers of, aprons. Then you want a sequel, and so to continue the story where you left off, you now decide that the aprons will have a manufacturing defect introduced by a rival apron manufacturer, and the protagonist now has to work out which aprons can be sold and which will end up as rags used to wash cars. In comparison to Casino Royale, Quantum of Solace is a bunch of rags, which is useful in certain circumstances, but you wouldn't wear them to meet the king. Though if you were meeting the shit king, then go for it. Quantum of Solace begins with a car chase in Italy, where Bond is chased by associates of Mr. White, who's actually in the trunk of Bond's car, where he's being delivered to M.
It's time to get out.
Mr. White sets up the plot.
We have people everywhere. Am I right?
And is rescued by one of his organisation's many plants, who up to now had been a loyal bodyguard to M. Bond's investigations take him to Haiti, where he meets Camille. He takes the place of somebody she was meeting for one reason, but was supposed to be killed by her lover Dominic Green, who's quickly established as a sleazy CEO of Green Planet.
So you did just try and have me killed.
And that made me very sad.
Camille turns out to be a Bolivian agent who got close to Green so she could get near wannabe dictator Medrano, who had killed her parents, and Camille wants to repay the favour. We zip over to Austria and Bond sees Green having a meeting with his fellow conspirators at a massive opera production. Quantum is some shadowy organisation with people at the very top of various corporations and governments, and while their choice of meeting venue is impressive, it must get annoying for actual opera fans who probably dropped $1,000 on a ticket only to have to listen to these knobends chatting away during Tosca. Look, we've all been to disappointing concerts that were ruined for some reason. I remember the time I went to see Coldplay live, and I was dismayed when I realised they would be playing Coldplay songs all night. M orders Bond to return home, but his leads point to Bolivia. Bond is now on his own, and so he enlists the help of Mathis, who Bond had denounced as a traitor in the previous movie. It turns out that was not the case, and now Bond asks for help from Mathis. That's a bold strategy, like Joe McCarthy asking Dalton Trumbo if he could write him a reference for a job application. And then zoosh, back on a plane headed for Bolivia, where on the journey Bond downs the plane's supply of booze, while Mathis is the latest to try and get Bond to realise Vesper was actually on his side the whole time. MI6 want Bond to head home, and so they send Miss Fields from the embassy to put him on a return flight, which of course ends up with her sleeping with Bond, and then she gets murdered by Green's goons. Everybody's after Bond. M at first wants to arrest him, but then she has a change of heart as Bond escapes. The local cops are after Bond. The CIA are after Bond. Mathis cops a few bullets, and after holding him as he died in a tender moment, Bond dumps his body in a skip. Now that is cold, and I thought it was annoying when neighbours dumped old mattresses in the skip that I hired when I was cleaning out the shed. Quantum of Solace is a film that makes a thing of people dying when they get near Bond. I have the same thing, except in my case it's with houseplants. Bond and Camille end up doing a bit more snooping when they discover Green and Quantum have been building vast underground dams in the desert with their plan to monopolise water supply after they've installed Medrano as the new leader of Bolivia. And then Camille and Bond head off to Green's base. Camille's there to execute Medrano, and Bond to deal with Green. Even though Green had nothing much to do with Vesper's death, he did have Miss Fields gassed up. The base is a hotel in the middle of the desert. Why? The hotel has the ambience of a white-collar prison. It's also powered by hydrogen. I mean, they even mention that in the dialogue. Why is it important? Because it's a short film of around 1 hour 45 minutes, and the film's finale needs to be kicked off when a minor fender bender sets off a chain reaction that will eventually destroy the hotel. Camille ends up killing the general, while Green gloats at Bond sucking another victim into his world.
Sounds like you just lost another one!
Very quickly, the hotel ignition blows up. Green is abandoned in the desert after coughing up info on Quantum. Camille and Bond say their goodbyes. Bond tracks down Vesper's supposedly dead boyfriend, who it turns out is already working on another mark, a Canadian intelligence operative who apparently has access to information vital to Canada's defence, such as the location of every Tim Hortons. And Bond is back. I am sorry to harp on about this, but I just go back to the Hotel Hindenburg, which seems like such an obviously poorly designed building that perhaps you can only book a room there on Explodia. I mean, that surely would have to be a no-smoking hotel. I can only imagine how many crabby people there are in the lobby chewing gum. Are the complimentary robes lined with asbestos? That sort of thing. I mean, I could do this all day. Brother, can you spare a light? If so, run. Quantum of Solace is a film that has a reputation for being a bad Bond film, or at least a mediocre one. I could concur with mediocre. It's not absolutely terrible, but it's nothing special. It's like a really good frozen pizza. You know, for a pizza snob like me, it's still a frozen pizza. Lousy frozen pizza. Casino Royale had done very well at the box office, reinventing Bond, by ironically going back to the character's roots. It had also reinvigorated the franchise creatively, after what felt like 25 years of Bond films being mainly, okay. Casino Royale was for many amazing. Quantum of Solace was for many not. I think about Quantum of Solace and remember it as being but then I watch it and goes to It's just one of those films that really is best described with non-verbal noises. That's a little it's a little bit and then it's more than a little bit.
Come on, lighten up. Cramping my style.
A follow-up to Casino Royale was intended even before the film's release, with the vague idea of planting threads that could be continued with a quick follow-up. When Casino Royale did so well critically and commercially, that follow-up was wanted as soon as possible. The eventual script by seasoned Bond writers Neil Purvis and Robert Wade, with drafts by Paul Haggis, brought together the writers of Casino Royale, but with the added time pressures of an impending WGA strike and a tight production schedule.
So shoot me. I'd rather stay in a morgue.
We are teachers on sabbatical. This fits our cover.
Somos maestros on el sabbatical. Y nos ganamos la lotería.
The film's eventual director was German-Swiss Marc Forster, which was apparently a really big deal as he was the first director not from a Commonwealth country, meaning he had no arcane ties to Britain. I mean, I'm from a Commonwealth country, and all that means is every 4 years spending 10 days pretending to give a shit about the Commonwealth Games. As in, did you see that? That's a new Commonwealth record. So in practice, having a German-born Bond director was as big a deal as accidentally getting served a large portion of fries when you ordered small fries. Quantum of Solace's plot is basically Daniel Craig's Bond being mopey, everybody else trying to make him see that Vesper did love him, while he goes around killing any and all leads that could lead him to Quantum. It has some fantastic action sequences, it's fast-paced, nicely edited, and for the most part, the action reads well, as you can generally work out what's going on without some voiceover added in post-production explaining the plot. The acting is also of a high standard, with another strong cast. Daniel Craig is peak Bond here, mopey and disdainful. Hand him something and he throws it away like a used condom, which if he ever did literally, I would hope he would tip the chambermaids better than most people do. This Bond constantly denies he's harbouring feelings over Vesper, or that he's on a vendetta against those who made her betray him, but no one is buying that bullshit.
Seems we're both using green to get to somebody.
Olga Kurylenko is Camille, an agent who's on her own revenge mission, but she's not as far gone as Bond, as far as studying for her murder belt.
Is that how you treat your friends?
Bond gives her some pointers, but the fact that people around him end up dead is just one of those things that the villains like to use to needle Bond.
Nice way of saying that everything he touches seems to wither and die.
Judi Dench as M is slightly wobbly when she realises she doesn't know who she can trust. Eventually she realises that she can in fact trust Bond.
I need you back.
I never left.
Gemma Arterton pops up briefly as Bond's conquest, Miss Strawberry Fields, who ends up with a bad case of gas. Jeffrey Wright returns as Felix Leiter, this time accompanied by the douchey CIA section chief, Beam, played by a pre-Stranger Things David Harbour.
You know who Green is and you want to put us in bed with him. You aren't kidding, right?
Yeah, you're right. We should just deal with nice people.
Giancarlo Giannini returns as Mathis, wronged by Bond and then dumped by Bond. Clearly, no one ever sang "You've Got a Friend in Me" to James Bond when he was a child.
It takes something to admit you were wrong.
And then there are little tiny roles like Game of Thrones actor Una Chaplin and the future star of television series Castle, Stana Katic. The film needs a villain.
If you decide not to sign, you will wake up with your balls in your mouth and your willing replacement standing over you.
Mathieu Amalric is meant to be a smarmy shit, but is destined to be one of those lesser Bond villains, where a good actor plays a relatively forgettable villain, like Julian Glover, Joe Don Baker, or Jonathan Pryce. And forget Oddjob or Jaws, Green has an even better sidekick. That's Elvis. Yeah, me neither.
Oh my gosh! I'm so sorry.
The film has finally decided to treat the CIA with a level of disdain, which does seem odd for Bond to be so cynical and judgmental considering what he does for a living.
Oh, you see, that's what I like about US intelligence. You'll lie down with anybody.
Including you, brother. Including you.
Where Quantum of Solace falls apart is the disparate plot elements that don't really come together. Like trying to make a cake where you misread the recipe and instead of adding chocolate chips into the mixing bowl, you add ball bearings.
We can work it out later.
Quantum's thing is to use basic utilities such as water supply as a tool for extortion. I mean, it's effective, so I've taken to setting up a water table along the route for the annual marathon, where I charge runners $5 a cup. $10 if they want water in it. Quantum of Solace is full of very high-end cars for 2008. Aston Martins, Alfa Romeos, Jaguars, Range Rovers, Fords, most of which had eye-watering price tags at the time. Now, thanks to their eye-watering depreciation, build quality and reliability issues, you can now see these cars again as they slowly bankrupt various car YouTubers.
I don't think the dead care about vengeance.
The film's name comes from an Ian Fleming short story of the same name, the plot of which is Bond at a dinner party with some uninteresting guests, and the host tells some anecdote about showing empathy, with the twist being that the story was in fact about the uninteresting guests. When the movie was announced, the title was roundly mocked, for good reason. Every cool-sounding Bond title had already been used in a movie. Then the short stories were rated, and by the time Quantum of Solace was chosen as a movie title, the pickings for an actual, as-yet unused, authentic Fleming titles were slim. All that was left, Property of a Lady, 007 in New York, Risico, and the Hildebrand Rarity. I mean, with those choices, you either make up your own title, or you choose something else created by Fleming. So why not this? Oh, you, pretty chitty bang bang, chitty chitty bang bang, we love you. And in chitty chitty bang bang, chitty chitty bang bang, what we'll do. Quantum as an organisation seems awfully like Spectre, but it isn't Spectre. But then later on in the movie Spectre, Quantum would become a subsection of actual Spectre. Is that at all confusing? Sure. Spectre as an organisation was in limbo as far as Albert R. Broccoli's Eon Productions were concerned, thanks to a decades-long legal dispute with producer Kevin McClory, which dated back to the publication of Ian Fleming's Thunderball novel. After Quantum of Solace was released, the Bond producers acquired McClory's lingering rights to aspects of Bond canon, and so Spectre was back on the table. Quantum was therefore relegated to a subsidiary of Spectre. Look, company reorgs often bring massive layoffs, but in a terrorist organisation, what you get instead is the office smelling like a barbecue for the next month. Mr. White was originally meant to be killed off in this film, but that scene ended up on the cutting room floor, which allowed the character to appear again. Though they never put this on the end credits. The theme song to Quantum of Solace thankfully did not try to work the title into lyrics. By this time, each new Bond film would involve various top artists writing submissions for a song to be considered for the movie's theme. While a demo for a theme song to Quantum of Solace had been prepared by Mark Ronson and Amy Winehouse, the movie would eventually feature a rock song, Another Way to Die, by Jack White and Alicia Keys, which, like so much from this movie, has its fair share of detractors. But I personally like its rocky sound. David Arnold had scored all of the Bond films since Tomorrow Never Dies, and he provided what turned out to be his final Bond score, at least until the point of this video's posting. Also, it's probably his least memorable. The film ends with the famous gun barrel logo, with what looks like a methed up Bond firing at the camera. Quantum of Solace basically cost about twice as much as Casino Royale, yet it made slightly less at the box office. Quantum of Solace feels like a much bigger film, it's much more epic feeling, yet it's just not on the same level as Casino Royale in terms of story and just enjoyability. Maybe the producers Michael G. Wilson and Barbara Broccoli took the lesson to heart, because Bond films, for various reasons, would now have much longer gaps between them, which helped them feel more special, more like events. Some were more special than others. Ultimately, Quantum of Solace is not a terrible Bond film, but it is a forgettable one. While it does continue on from Casino Royale, it's like a boxer's training routine. It's really worth skipping. Quantum of Solace and the Fleming short story was meant to be the point where the amount that you cared for something reached such a low point that you didn't give a shit what happened to it. That's somehow appropriate for this film.
That offends you?
No, not in the slightest.
The next Bond film, Skyfall, would land in 2012, and well, that's just one of my faves of the entire series, where it hopefully helps you forget Quantum of... what's his name?
That wasn't very nice.
If you enjoyed this review, please like and subscribe, leave a comment, or check out some of our other videos. Bang a bang a chitty chitty bang a bang, I'll find for a pen.